I haven't the faintest idea what number 7 means. Could it mean the resurrection, the time out of time, which is eternity? Of course, there's no such place, except now, in time, while we think on what is, finally, all together and forever. Love, Archie.
That's wonderful. Yes. Well, I think your question was definitely a good one. And of course, I think it's interesting that he insists very much on how salvation, to be saved is here, local and mortal, which is a thing he writes in Sphere, so that it's very clear that he doesn't want there to be a transcendent salvation. And I think my interpretation of that would be that if there is, you were talking about Easter and resurrection, and he brings it up too, the time out of time, which is eternity. My impression is that for him and in his poetry, there's always a return to time. And so if there is a kind of salvation or resurrection, it's not going into eternity, but perhaps espousing the whole movement of time, enlarging our ability to become part of the movement.
I agree, and I think that in the final hypothesis, he wants to say something like the following, that nothing is lost in time.
Yes.
If time is the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit like the conclusion, very different in some respects, but Nietzsche came to this conclusion. He said, hey, if time is infinite, let's say there's no end to time, then all possibilities of material combinations have existed an infinite number of times before, and therefore eternal recurrence of the same, and so
mm-hmm.
forth. I don't think that's what he means as such, but when he says that eternity, of course, there's no such place except now,
yes.
in time, while we think on what is finally altogether and forever, I think he's not denying the existence of eternity. He says there's no such place except in the now,
mm-hmm.
in time, while we think, and that as long as we're thinking it, it might be happening. But of course, if we're not thinking it, maybe this place doesn't exist. And maybe one of the purposes of his poetry is to allow that place really to exist more fully.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think the image for that is, his poem Sphere, as you mentioned, is the form of a motion. And I think motion, it's the idea is of this time can be a single motion or a dance, as he mentions in Easter Morning, that is continuous, that goes on, and that therefore things are preserved if you continue that motion or you continue that dance or you enter into it. And his poetry is definitely an invitation to enter into that motion and be part of it.
Yeah. Laura, one of my favorite books of Archie's is Glare, which is a late book of his, I think came out in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
His last book, yeah.
Is his last book. Yeah, apart from the posthumous stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like that book as well?
I do. I find it very compelling because he's really confronting, I think, illness and old age and death and sort of grief in this very personal way of one's own existence coming close to its end. And he meditates on that in a very beautiful way. And Glare has two parts. The first part is really about this constrainment and the advancement of old age. And the second part is more improvisational. It's been compared to jazz. It has this celebration of possibility yet again. So there's once again being able to bring together movement, bring together these two things in movement. And I'd like to read a short part of Glare.
Yeah, go ahead. Short part, because
yes.
we don't have that much time.
Yes. It starts this way. Hear me, O Lord, from the height of the high place where speaking is not necessary to hearing, and hearing is in all languages. Hear me, please, have mercy, for I have hurt people, though I think not much, and wear much never intentionally. And I have accumulated a memory and some heavy fantasy, guilt-ridden, and as a non-religious person, I have no way to assuage, relieve, or forgive myself. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit. He continues, half guilty in most cases, sometimes in all. We are half guilty and we live in pain, but may we suffer in your cool presence, may we weep in your surrounding that already has understood. We could not walk here without our legs, and our feet kill, our steps however careful. If you can send no word silently healing, I mean if it is not proper or realistic to send word, actual lips saying these broken sounds, why, may we be allowed to suppose that we can work this stuff out the best we can, and having felt our sins to their deepest definitions, may we walk with you as along a line of trees, every now and then your clarity and warmth shattering across our shadowed way.
Yeah, if our listeners have to just read one thing by Ammons, I think it has to be glare. Every time I read any line from that book, I say, what a miracle at the end of, close to the end of a poet's life, where most poets do their best work in their youth, and many of them are worthless later. Not the case with Ammons, and that passage you read is just a prime sort of sample of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think he really took up the challenge that you were mentioning at the beginning, which is that not to allow his view of nature as motion and as this beautiful movement of love, not to escape into that. So when he was confronted with old age and illness, and the death of friends is one thing that he talks about in Glare as well, the death of loved ones, he really confronted that and made a whole new poem out of it that has this great image at the end of the part I read that I like, of shattered light. So it's again, it's about motion, but it also suggests that we ourselves are in some way the intersection of shadow and light, of the radiance that comes in some way from nature, and the shadow, the need for binding, for attachment.
Well, and finally, I have to say that we haven't touched at all on the prosodic elements of his poetry, and he is just, I think, the most extraordinary lineator that I know of, who also, the visual display or outlay of the poem on the page is so crucial that maybe this doesn't come across when we've read it here on air, but he was a very visual creature. He was always looking at the world, and he wrote his poems really to be as seen as much as to be read, in the way that the lines are actually broken up. So the experience of actually reading him on the page is a much fuller one, perhaps, than hearing him. So
yeah, I quite agree. I do think, though, that the full experience in many ways is both looking and reading out loud, because his poems, a lot of the movement in his poems is also the movement of your breath, and that is both similar and different to what's on the page, and that's a big part of the beauty of reading him.
Well, if he's listening to us somehow, Laura, I hope that he agrees with me that we've done him a little bit of justice, at least.
I hope so.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.